My father rang on a Tuesday morning, and by the time the call ended, I already knew my brother had made the most costly mistake of his life. My name is Ray Callahan. I'm 63 years old, and I spent 31 years working as a civil engineer in Wollongong before I retired with a bad knee, a reasonable superbalance, and a habit of noticing when structural things are about to give way, not just in concrete and steel. In families, too. You develop an eye for stress fractures when you've spent long enough watching things hold together under pressure. And standing in my kitchen in Bowral on a Tuesday morning in late autumn, kettle just clicked off. I felt that particular tension in my chest, the kind that means something has already shifted and nobody's thought to tell you yet. Welcome to Shadow Letters. Settle in. Make yourself a cup of something warm. And remember, the people in these stories were given every opportunity to do the right thing. They simply decided not to. If this is your first time here, subscribe. You'll want to stay. It was 8:15 on a Tuesday. My father, Graham Callahan, 79 years old, still living on his own in the house on Merindah Road in Bowral, the same house he'd shared with my mother for 38 years before she passed, rang me without any preamble at all. No g'day. No complaint about the cold or his hip. Just my name. Flat and deliberate. The way he used to say it when I was 16 and had done something he hadn't decided how to address yet. Right, Dad. I turned the kettle off. What's going on? Did your brother's housewarming already happen? I set my mug down slowly on the bench. My younger brother, Scott, and his wife Renata had recently moved into a new place in Mossvale about 20 minutes from Dad as it happened. A big house with a double garage and the kind of landscaped garden Renata posted about on social media more often than was necessary. They'd been talking about a housewarming for weeks, the kind of event that gets mentioned in passing, until suddenly it's already happened. Yeah, I said. I think it was Saturday. Why? Nobody rang me, Ray. I found out from Barry Hutchins at the Bowls Club. He said Renata had mentioned it to his wife at the hairdresser. I didn't say anything for a moment. The kettle steamed quietly next to me. Outside, a magpie was going at it on the fence. She laughed, my father said. When I rang Scott to ask about it, Renata got on the line and said, "Oh, Graham, that was last Saturday. Wasn't it lovely?" Just like that, I felt something cool move through me. Not anger, not yet. Something more like recognition. The slow, sinking acknowledgement of a thing you've suspected for a long time, finally stepping into the light. She laughed. My father said again. And something in the way he repeated it told me he understood exactly what that laugh had cost her. I didn't know it in that moment. But that single dismissive laugh was about to become the most expensive sound Renata Callahan had ever made. I rang Scott before I'd even finished my tea. He picked up quickly, too quickly, with the careful energy of a man who'd been half expecting the call and still hadn't decided what to do with it. Why wasn't Dad at the housewarming? Silence. The specific silence of someone running calculations. It was just, close friends, Ray. Work people. Renata's crew from her yoga group. He's your father, Scott. He lives 20 minutes away. I know. We're going to have him over separately. We wanted something more, and then I heard it. Renata's voice in the background. Not the words, just the pitch of it. Low, urgent, like a stage director whispering through the curtain. Something tightened in my chest. "We'll explain properly," Scott said finally. "Can we come round Thursday? We want to do it in person." Scott. "Please, Ray. Thursday." He hung up. I stood in my kitchen in Bowral with cold tea and a hot suspicion and the growing, uncomfortable certainty that this had nothing to do with a housewarming. I rang Dad back. "Thursday," I told him. "Scott and Renata want to come round and explain in person." There was a pause. Long enough to drive a ute through. "Dad, what aren't you telling me?" Another pause. Then, do you remember Margaret Noonan? From my old work Christmas parties. She's in Renata's book club now, apparently. She rang me Sunday night to say what a lovely housewarming it had been, and she mentioned they'd had a visitor in the afternoon, a woman with a briefcase. Young. Very professional. Margaret thought she might have been a solicitor. The floor tilted slightly under me. They all went inside for about 40 minutes. Dad continued. Left the guests on the back deck. When Scott came back out, he looked like he'd swallowed something unpleasant. Renata looked like she'd won a raffle. Dad, I said carefully. You know what I'm going to ask. Yes. Are they looking at the property? The assets? Graham Callahan had lived on Merindah Road for 41 years. The house had been paid off for 2 decades. There was a small parcel of land attached to it, just over 12 acres, stretching behind the property toward the escarpment that my grandfather had farmed and my father had held on to on principle. There was also a self-managed super fund that would surprise people who assumed a retired railway foreman from the Southern Highlands wouldn't have been quietly, diligently saving since 1987. He'd never talked about money. That was the thing about his generation. They just kept working and kept putting it away, and the accumulation crept up silently while everyone else was busy looking elsewhere. Ray, he said. How well do you know Renata? Well enough. Then you know the answer already. He was right. I'd never quite been able to name what bothered me about my sister-in-law. She was friendly, efficient, always asked after your health, with her head tilted at exactly the right angle. But underneath the warmth there was a quality I'd never trusted, a watchfulness that wasn't interest, a careful attentiveness that never quite forgot what it was looking for. I told myself I was being unfair. I'd told myself Scott was happy, and happy was enough. I'd been telling myself a comfortable lie for years, and I'd just run out of road. I'm going to make some calls, I told Dad. I already have, he said, and there it was. Something in his voice that wasn't distress and wasn't anger. Something closer to composure. The composure of a man who has spent 79 years watching the world try to get the better of people and has long since stopped being surprised by it. Ray, he said. Why do you think I rang you Tuesday morning? He hung up before I could answer. I stood in my kitchen in Bowral with a cold mug and a feeling I hadn't had in years. The specific, uncomfortable feeling of being several moves behind someone you'd underestimated. I thought about my brother Scott, who I'd grown up with, who I'd bailed out of trouble more than once, who was fundamentally a decent man, but had always had a blind spot the size of the Southern Highlands when it came to his wife. I thought about Renata, polished and purposeful, and the woman with the briefcase. I thought about my father, 79. On his own, on Merindah Road, the kind of quiet, solid man who'd never asked anyone for anything in his life, who was now apparently the subject of a plan he wasn't supposed to know about. I picked up my phone and pulled up a contact I hadn't used in 18 months. A solicitor I'd dealt with during a property dispute years ago. I typed 3 words. Ring me. Urgent. I didn't know yet what my father had already set in motion. But I had a feeling that by the time Scott and Renata turned up on Thursday with their rehearsed explanations and careful smiles, they were going to walk into something they hadn't remotely prepared for. They thought they were coming to manage me. They had no idea who they were actually dealing with. If you've made it this far, do us one favor before we go on. Subscribe. Most people watch without ever hitting that button, but it costs you nothing, and it means everything to us. Thank you, genuinely. 5 days. That's how long Scott and Renata let the silence sit between the phone call and Thursday. Long enough, I suppose, to hope I'd soften, reconsider. Convince myself I'd misread the situation. I received one text from Scott on Wednesday afternoon. Still planning for tomorrow, Ray. 1:30. With a full stop at the end. Not a question mark, not a see ya there. A full stop. The punctuation of a man who had been told what to write. I spent those 5 days doing what I do best. Not catastrophizing. Not rehearsing arguments in the shower. I made quiet calls. I drove down to Merindah Road on Monday afternoon, sat across from my father at his kitchen table, the same table where I'd done my Year 12 maths, the same table where Mum had written Christmas cards every November, drank his terrible instant coffee, and listened. Because it turned out that Graham Callahan, retired railway foreman, had not been sitting on Merindah Road waiting to be rescued. The morning after Margaret Noonan's phone call, so the Sunday, my father had gotten dressed in his good trousers, driven himself to Bowral town centre, and walked into the office of a solicitor named Patricia Leung. Second floor of the Oxley building on Bongbong Street. He'd pulled her card from a drawer where he kept important things. The rates notices, the insurance documents, my mother's recipe book. He'd met Patricia 2 years earlier when she'd handled the Carmody family's estate after old Frank Carmody passed. Graham had spoken to Frank's son about it at the Bowls Club and kept her card, just in case. "You just walked in Sunday morning?" I said. "Monday," Dad corrected. "She doesn't work Sundays." He looked at me with the mild expression of a man who found my surprise faintly embarrassing. I told her what Margaret told me. She asked some questions. Then she made some calls of her own. "What kind of calls?" He set his coffee cup down carefully. "The kind that confirmed Scott and Renata had engaged a solicitor, a fellow named Drummond, operating out of an office in Campbelltown, to begin preliminary steps toward a formal challenge of my father's decision-making capacity." The kitchen on Merindah Road went very still. Outside, the wind moved through the old liquidambar in the front yard. A car passed slowly on the road. Normal Tuesday sounds in a normal neighborhood. Except nothing about this was normal. "Decision-making capacity," I said. "Apparently I'm no longer considered able to manage my own affairs," Graham said, with exactly the tone of a man who found this professionally insulting. Patricia explained the process to me in some detail. She also explained what I needed to do to ensure it goes nowhere. Which is, he smiled. It was a small, contained smile. The same one he used to give me when I was 24 and thought I understood things better than him. I never did. Not once. "We'll get to that," he said. Thursday came the way a hard conversation always does. You've known it was coming, you've prepared as well as you can, and there's still that moment when the doorbell rings and your stomach drops anyway. Scott and Renata pulled up to my place in Bowral at 1:27 in Renata's silver BMW. Of course it was a BMW. I watched them from the front window for a moment before I went to the door. Scott got out first. He looked tired, the specific tiredness of a man who'd been losing the same argument for 5 days. Renata got out second and she looked the opposite. Composed, attentive, wearing that particular careful smile I'd spent years trying to decode. I had the translation now. It meant, "I want something that doesn't belong to me." I opened the door before they knocked. Scott hugged me a real hug. The kind that meant the brotherly part of him was still intact, whatever else had happened. I held that. "Come in," I said. I made a pot. Renata kissed my cheek. "Ray, thank you for being so patient with us. We wanted to do this properly. Face to face." "Of course," I said. Sat them at the kitchen table. Poured the tea. Waited. Scott was the one who spoke first. "Ray, we need to talk about Dad." I said nothing. Just looked at him. "We're worried," Renata said, sliding in smoothly on the handoff. "He's nearly 80. He's alone in that house, managing significant assets without any real structure around him. And some of the choices he's been making lately—" "What choices?" I asked. "Just once." Renata blinked. She hadn't expected me to push back that fast. "Well, he donated quite a lot to the CWA last year, and apparently he's been talking about gifting part of the land to a conservation trust without consulting anyone. It's his land, Renata." "Of course it is," Scott said. "Nobody's saying otherwise. We're just saying there should be some oversight. For his own protection. For his protection, I repeated. I looked at my brother, this bloke I'd taught to ride a bike, driven to his first job interview, lent money to without keeping score, and I felt something I can only describe as sad fury. Because Scott wasn't a villain. He was a decent bloke who'd married a woman with a plan and had spent long enough mistaking it for a partnership. Is that why there was a solicitor at your housewarming? I asked. The air in the room changed completely. Scott went still. Renata's smile held it was too practiced to dissolve outright, but something tightened at the edges, a fraction of tension pulling it tight. Who told you that? She asked. Does it matter? It wasn't she was there as a friend, Scott said. Just happened to be invited. A solicitor named Drummond, I said. Campbelltown office. Renata set her teacup down. The same solicitor, I continued, who Patricia Leung's office identified on Monday when Dad walked in to see her. Whatever composure Renata had been maintaining made a quiet departure. Ray, she began. Patricia Leung, I said. Oxley Building. Bong Bong Street. She's now Dad's solicitor of record. Silence. And as of Wednesday, Dad has made some changes to his estate documents. Patricia informed me they've been signed, witnessed, and filed. Scott looked at his wife. One fast look, a fraction of a second. But I'd been reading my brother's face for 53 years, and I knew exactly what it meant. He hadn't known. He hadn't known about Drummond. Not the specifics, not the plan. Scott, I said. And something in my voice came out quieter than I expected. How much of this did you actually know? He didn't answer. His jaw tightened, and he looked down at the tabletop. That was answer enough. We were protecting everyone, Renata said. The family's long-term interests. Graham is 79. He's alone. He's sitting on assets that belonged to him, I said. That he earned. That your father-in-law built over 50 years of getting up early and not spending money he didn't have. And you used my brother's housewarming as cover for a legal consultation to begin challenging his mental capacity. That's not. I held up one hand. She stopped. Outside, the liquidambar rustled in the autumn wind. A normal sound. The world entirely indifferent. Here's what I need you to understand, I said. And I kept my voice level because losing it would feel good for about 8 seconds and then hand Renata something to use. My father already knew. He knew before I did. He was in Patricia Leung's office on Monday while you were still deciding what to wear to this meeting. And Drummond's preliminary work is finished. There's nothing there to build on anymore. I paused. Dad restructured everything. Patricia's documentation is, and I'm using her words, thorough and well-prepared. A challenge on capacity grounds would take years and go nowhere. And as of last week, Dad also completed a full cognitive assessment with a Dr. Lorraine Bates at the Bowral Medical Center. Memory, reasoning, judgment, the works. Patricia has a copy on file. It's attached to the estate documents. Renata opened her mouth. I don't know the details of what he changed, I said. He didn't tell me. He said, and this is direct, Ray. A man's affairs are his own business. I almost smiled at that. The kitchen was quiet for a long time. Then Scott said, very quietly, I'm sorry, Ray. I looked at my brother. I didn't tell him it was all right because it wasn't. But I heard what was underneath it. The sound of a man starting to find his way back. There's one more thing, I said. Dad's invited us all to Sunday lunch. You, Renata. And he's also invited Jamie. Scott looked up. Jamie doesn't know what's been happening, does he? Scott shook his head slowly. He's going to find out, I said. Not from me, but he will. And that conversation is between you and your son. I stood up. I think we're done for today. Renata looked like she had a great deal left to say. She said none of it. They left at 2:51. I watched the silver BMW reverse out of my driveway and disappear up the street. Then I rang my father. He picked up on the first ring. "How'd it go?" he asked. "About how you'd expect," I said. Scott didn't know about Drummond. "Not really." "No," Dad said. "I didn't think he did." I leaned against the kitchen wall. "What exactly did you change in those documents?" Silence. Then that sound. That particular Graham Callahan silence. That isn't emptiness. It's satisfaction, contained within good manners. "I told you, Ray. A man's affairs are his own business." "Dad, Sunday lunch," he said. "I'm doing a roast." He hung up. I stood in my kitchen in Bowral at 3 in the afternoon, in the quiet that follows the thing you've been bracing for. And I thought about my father, a man who'd never asked anyone to notice how hard he worked, who'd built something real and solid and unpretentious over a lifetime of Tuesday mornings and early shifts and sensible decisions, and who had been assessed, strategized against, and legally maneuvered by people who ate his food and called him family. He'd already won before any of us knew the game had started. Sunday. That's when Graham Callahan chose to do what needed doing, over a lamb roast, roasted pumpkin, bread rolls he'd made himself, and a pot of tea in the good cups, the ones with the blue pattern that only came out for important occasions. He'd ironed the tablecloth. When I pulled up to Merindah Road and saw the ironed tablecloth through the dining room window, I sat in my car for a full 10 seconds. The iron tablecloth meant he'd been planning this for longer than he'd let on to anyone. I also noticed, pulling up, that Scott's car was in the driveway, and parked behind it was a small red hatchback. I didn't immediately recognize until I saw the Southern Cross air freshener hanging from the mirror and remembered that Jamie, my nephew, had gotten a new car in January. Graham had invited Jamie. Without telling anyone else, I sat in the car and appreciated that for a moment. Jamie Callahan was 22, studying a double degree in environmental science and law at the University of Wollongong, living in a share house in Fairy Meadow, and possessed of the kind of easy, unguarded warmth that comes from someone who genuinely hasn't yet been given a reason to be suspicious of the people who love him. He was, in short, exactly the person his grandmother Renata had built her plan around, someone young enough to be managed, trusting enough not to ask questions, and whose future could theoretically be shaped by whoever controlled the assets. He had no idea. I walked in through the front door. You don't knock at Graham's. He finds it overly formal from family, and found Scott at the kitchen bench pretending to look at his phone. Jamie was at the dining table, long legs stretched out, reading something on his laptop, looking up every few seconds to talk to his grandfather across the kitchen. Renata sat at the far end of the table, back straight, expression composed, hands quiet in her lap. The posture of a woman who has learned to make stillness look like control. Dad was at the stove. He half turned when I came in. "Hang your coat," he said. 15 minutes. I hung my coat. I sat down. I said g'day to Jamie, who grinned and said something about the drive up from Wollongong and the roadworks on the Hume. Normal Sunday sounds. The kind that exist in the same world as iron tablecloths and careful plans. The meal itself was a masterpiece of ordinary. Graham asked Jamie about his environmental law unit. He asked Scott about the new place, whether the hot water system was behaving. He complimented Renata on her earrings, a careful compliment, warm enough to be received as genuine, considered enough to keep her slightly off balance about what it meant. I ate and watched and said very little. Scott was doing the same, picking at his food, laughing half a beat behind everything, present in body and somewhere else entirely in mind. Jamie ate with the complete appetite of someone 22 who'd driven an hour and a half for a home-cooked meal and had no reason to feel anything other than completely at ease. Then Graham set down his fork, folded his napkin, placed it beside his plate, with a small, deliberate movement. I had heard that sound before. At the kitchen table on Monday, right before he told me about Drummond and Patricia Leung. It was the sound of a man who has decided that the moment has arrived. "Jamie," he said pleasantly. His grandson looked up from his third bread roll. "Yeah? Grandad?" Graham reached into the chest pocket of his good flannel shirt, the navy one, the one he wore to the Bowls Club presentation evenings, and produced an envelope. Cream-colored. Sealed. He slid it across the table. Jamie picked it up with the easy curiosity of someone who expects a birthday card. He opened it, and I watched what happened to his face as he read. The ease softened first, then curiosity shifted to concentration. Then something else moved in. Slowly, behind his eyes, something slower and more serious. The kind of thought that rearranges other thoughts to make room for itself. "Grandad," he said carefully. Is this what I think it is?" "It's a letter of intention," Graham said. "Patricia Leung's office has already set up the account in your name. The formal transfer initiates next week. The letter is so you have it in writing. From me." In my own words. Scott had gone completely still. His fork was resting against his plate like he'd forgotten he was holding it. Renata was very still, in a different way. The stillness of someone recalibrating. Jamie looked up. His voice had changed, the easy warmth still there, but with something more careful underneath it now, feeling its way forward. "Grandad, it's a lot. Why now?" "Because," Graham said simply, "you're going to finish that degree, and then you're going to do something that matters with it. This is to make sure money isn't the reason you don't." He picked up his teacup. "It's been sitting there long enough. Your grandmother would have wanted it used." The table was quiet. Jamie looked down at the letter again. I watched him read it a second time. Then Renata said, in a voice that was controlled but not quite, "Graham, we didn't know you were planning. There's also a condition," Graham said pleasantly, as though she hadn't spoken. "It goes into an account in Jamie's name only. Not a joint account, not a family account. Patricia has the details. Jamie, she'll ring you Monday to walk you through the paperwork." Renata tried again. "Graham, I've also had a conversation with Patricia," Graham continued, "about my estate arrangements more broadly. Everything has been updated. The Merindah Road property, the land behind the escarpment, the self-managed fund, all of it has been restructured. Patricia described it as quite airtight, which I thought was reassuring." He sipped his tea. "And I want to mention, because I think it's relevant, that I've had a comprehensive cognitive assessment done with a doctor, Lorraine Bates, at the Bowral Medical Center. Memory, reasoning, judgment." He tilted his head slightly. "Dr. Bates said she was pleased with the results, that it reflected well-preserved function across all domains. Patricia has a copy. It's attached to the estate filing." The hairline crack in Renata's composure opened just enough to be visible if you knew where to look. "I know about Drummond," Graham said. His voice didn't harden. It didn't need to. It just settled, the way something heavy settles when you set it down. "I know about the meeting at the housewarming. I know what was in the briefcase." Jamie turned slowly to look at his mother. The way you turn toward a sound you need to verify you actually heard. "What meeting?" he said. Nobody answered. "What briefcase?" His voice had changed again, all the ease gone now. Something flatter and older in its place. "What are you talking about, Grandad?" Graham looked at his grandson with an expression of complete, uncomplicated love. "Ask your parents, mate," he said gently. "I think it's time. What followed is not something I'll recount in full, because parts of it belong to Scott and his son and the particular, irreversible work of being honest with someone who trusted you. What I'll tell you is that Jamie Callahan was not the oblivious kid he'd appeared to be over bread rolls and environmental law. He was a 22-year-old who'd noticed things. A woman he didn't recognize at the housewarming, who'd come in and out of a closed room. His mother's energy that day, tight, purposeful, distracted in a way that didn't match the occasion. His father's quietness afterward in the car on the way home. He'd tucked it away, the way perceptive people do, filed it under things I'll come back to. When it came out, when Scott, pale and halting, explained what they'd been trying to do, Jamie didn't raise his voice. He didn't push back from the table or make it a scene. He just looked at his mother with an expression I recognized immediately, because I'd seen it on my own face in the bathroom mirror on Tuesday night. The expression of someone quietly rearranging everything they thought they knew about a person. "You went to a solicitor," he said. "At my uncle's housewarming," Renata tried. "Jamie, we were trying to make sure the family—" "A solicitor," he said again. The same way. Flat and careful. Like he was testing whether the words were real. She had no answer to that. Scott tried to hold the room together, but there was nothing to hold. Some truths, once they're in the air, change the air permanently. By 5:30, Scott and Renata were gone. Jamie stayed. He sat at the kitchen table with my father while I cleared the plates and washed up my traditional post-Sunday lunch roll at Merindah Road since approximately 1988. And I listened to them talk, the real kind of talking. The kind that happens after all the managed conversation has been cleared away. "I'm sorry, Grandad," Jamie said. "I'm sorry they did that. Don't apologize for other people's choices," Graham said. "That's weight you don't need carrying." A pause. The familiar sounds of Merindah Road settling around them, the old house, the big liquid ambar out front, the occasional car on the road. "Are you all right?" Jamie asked. "I'm 79 years old," Graham said. "I've come through a few things. Your grandmother passing. The drought in '94 that took half the top paddock. A knee reconstruction at 61 that the physio said was unnecessary, and I maintain was entirely necessary." He paused. "This was an inconvenience." Jamie laughed, surprised into it. "The same way you laugh when someone makes you feel better faster than you expected. An inconvenience. A manageable one," Graham said. "I have good people around me. Patricia is sharp. Your Uncle Ray, despite his tendency to worry, kept himself together." "I only worry because you don't," I said from the sink. "I worry," Dad said. "I just don't announce it." Jamie laughed again. I walked out to my car at 6:45. Jamie came out with me. Hands in the pockets of his jacket, the autumn cold turning his breath to small clouds. "Uncle Ray." "Yeah." He looked at the envelope still in his hand, then back at me. "This is real?" "It's real. Patricia's office has everything set up. Your name, your account. It's done. I didn't know he was going to do this." "I know you didn't." I looked at my nephew, this kid who'd been used as a justification for a plan he'd never been told about, who'd sat through a Sunday lunch that had quietly dismantled his understanding of his own family, and who hadn't fallen apart or deflected or made the afternoon about himself. "Don't waste it," I said. He nodded. Kicked at a stone on the driveway. "Is Dad going to be okay?" There it was. The kid who still loves his father. Even now. "He's going to have some hard weeks," I said. "But Scott's not a bad man. He made a bad decision with someone who was very persuasive about it being a reasonable one. People recover from that, if they do the work." Jamie was quiet a moment. "What about Mum?" I looked at him for a moment. "That," I said carefully, "is above my pay grade." He almost smiled. He looked back at the house, the light in the kitchen window, my father's silhouette moving unhurriedly in the warm light. "He's something else, isn't he?" "Grandad. He always has been," I said. "We just keep forgetting to pay attention." I drove back up through the Southern Highlands on a cold Sunday evening with the heater on low and the radio quiet, and that particular feeling of a man who has watched something be put right without a single raised voice. It's a quieter satisfaction than you'd expect. Less explosion, more exhale. The feeling of watching someone mistake stillness for absence and live with the consequences of that mistake. Graham Callahan had been written off, a quiet old bloke on his own on Merindah Road, managing too much land and too much money for someone his age. Surely due for someone to step in and handle things more sensibly. He'd been assessed, planned around, and legally maneuvered by people who accepted his hospitality and called him family. He had beaten them before they'd even finished deciding on a strategy. He had a cognitive assessment on file, an airtight estate, a solicitor who knew exactly what she was doing, a grandson whose future was secured in an account that nobody else could reach, and a Sunday roast that had served as the most elegantly constructed final act I'd ever witnessed. All Drummond had was a preliminary file that Patricia Leung's documentation had rendered useless, and a client who was about to receive a very unproductive Monday morning phone call. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat somewhere past Mittagong. I glanced at it at the lights. A text from Dad. Good lunch. Rolls came out well. I stared at it for a second, then typed back. You ended it over a lamb roast and tea in the good cups. Mum would have found that perfect. 3 dots. Disappeared. Came back. She always said the best moments happen at a proper table. I put the phone down and drove the rest of the way home in the dark. And I thought about my father, a quiet, methodical man who had built something honest over 50 years and left nothing to chance when it mattered most. I thought about what it means to underestimate someone who has simply never needed you to know what they were capable of. I thought about how the people who tried to take advantage of him had looked at a 79-year-old bloke alone in an old house and seen opportunity, had seen what they wanted to see instead of what was actually there. They hadn't seen him. They'd never seen him, and that was the only mistake that ever mattered. There's something worth sitting with at the end of a story like this. The people who tried to move against Graham hadn't invented their approach. It's older than any of us. It relies on a simple assumption that age equals diminishment, that a person who moves slowly, speaks carefully, and doesn't broadcast their capabilities must have fewer of them. It's an assumption that flatters the people who make it, and it blinds them completely. The older I get, the more I believe that the most dangerous people in any room are not the loudest. They're the ones who've had 60, 70, 80 years to learn exactly when to speak and when to simply wait, who've watched enough bad decisions unfold to know how they start, who have, tucked away in a kitchen drawer, the card of a solicitor they met at a friend's estate settlement, just in case. Never assume that a quiet life means a simple mind. Never assume that someone who doesn't argue is someone who doesn't know. And never not ever assume that because someone is old, they are done. Some people are just getting started. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Shadow Letters for more stories about the moments that change everything told quietly, the way the best ones always are. And leave a comment below. We read everyone.